To say, oh, the church should be about community, well, community looks different in different cultures. One thing that's disrespectful in one culture is honorable in another. White churches show respect by quietness. That's not the case in black culture. It's call and response. White theology emphasizes the individual. And when it comes to black culture in America, the emphasis is communal. People are flying me to Hong Kong and New Zealand and Paris to perform. I feel like a rock star, but I was still like making $30,000 a year, you know? I think with people who want to pursue art full time as their vocation, that is more of a mindset than anything else.
In this episode of the Wayfaring Stranger podcast, I talked to my friend, Micah Bournes. Micah is a rapper and a poet, and he actually went to Moody a little bit before me, but we never met there. We actually met through a friend sending me an Instagram post he made saying that he needed a video editor and somebody who could shoot for him. So we connected a few years ago and have been friends ever since. Micah has been a big inspiration to me, especially because he's one of the few people I know personally who has pursued an artist's lifestyle full time. In this episode, we talk about how he started rapping and writing poetry. We talk about the different experiences white Christians and black Christians have in church in America, as well as his personal approach to making art and how that affects what types of projects he chooses and how he chooses to present them to others. It's always enjoyable to talk to Micah and have him challenge some of my beliefs, as well as inspire me to take my work more seriously. I hope you enjoy this episode.
College is when I started writing. I first started with music. My freshman year, I met one dude named Abraham, and he was a black dude from Miami, and he wanted to learn music production, and he loved hip hop. So he's like, hey man, I don't really know how to write songs, but I want to learn how to make them. So he had some like free software he had downloaded, as well as like some instrumentals. And he's like, I know you like rap music. Like, why don't you write some songs with me so that I can learn how to record and stuff? So my freshman year, I started rapping just for fun. But then we would show our friends, and they was like, yo, man, you're actually pretty good at this, you know? And every song was a collaboration because we didn't know how to write 3 verses and a chorus. It was just like, I got like 20 seconds of rap. Like, somebody else want to jump on this, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that started my freshman year. And then I got pretty good at it. So I was rapping for 2 years. And then my junior year, it was actually the summer before my junior year. I was home in Long Beach for the summer, and my friend invited me to an open mic, and I saw spoken word poetry for the first time live. So I saw it in the summer in LA, but then when I got back to school in the fall, I started going to open mics around Chicago, and I started like connecting to poets. So yeah, so I kind of added poetry to rapping. And now I write songs in other genres as well, not just hip hop, but yeah, I didn't start until college. Yeah.
What was your church experience like? Was it mainly a black church experience, or did you have like a mixed church experience?
Yeah, so the very first church I remember was an all-black church in Compton. But we only went there for the first few years of my life, probably until I was maybe 5 or 6, but I remember it. But then after that, most of middle school and high school, we went to 2 different churches, and they were multi-ethnic as far as the congregation, but they were not when it comes to the culture of the church. And what I mean by that is the style of music, the style of preaching, even the theology and the thinking. I didn't know this at the time, but it was like, yes, we have people of different skin colors, but essentially we run this like a white church, and we invite people of other backgrounds to come to our white cultured church. We never incorporate those cultures into the life of the church at all. So those are the type of churches I grew up going to most of the time. And so even though I didn't grow up in black church, I still felt connected to it because at home, my parents would play a lot of black gospel music and sing Negro spirituals around the house. And so when I got to Moody, one thing that was really important to me, I was like, I need some balance in my life. So I I didn't grow up going to all black churches, but I intentionally sought out an all black church in an all black neighborhood in Chicago. And it was really good because it was a reminder like, man, there's more than one way to look at this gospel. There's more than one way to understand Jesus because Moody had a very particular and very white understanding of the Bible. And then I, on the weekends, was going to an all black church who looked at things differently. And that was really important. And I think, people try, especially in American Christianity, white, conservative, evangelical American Christianity, they don't want to acknowledge their biases, their lenses. And everybody has a lens. There is no objective interpretation of the Bible. There is no, well, this is just orthodox biblical theology. No, you're interpreting it through your context, through your culture. And that's not a problem. It's only a problem when you try to act like you don't have a lens. So it's like theology and then black theology, Latino theology. But, white folks, we just have biblical theology. You have white theology.
Right.
And your culture and your values and your understanding of things is affecting the way you're interpreting. Not just the Bible, it's affecting the way that you run as a community, right? Like to say, oh, the church should be about community. Well, community looks different in different cultures. Not every culture does community the same.
Right.
Not every culture worships the same. One thing that's disrespectful in one culture is honorable in another, And so, again, there were so many things that there were expressions of just me being black that were seen as wrong or bad or disrespectful. A lot of white churches, not all, but a lot of white churches show respect by quietness, right? When someone is speaking, you're quiet and you pay attention and you take notes and it shows that you're honoring and that you're listening. That's not the case in black culture. It's call and response. It's disrespectful to be quiet. The preacher is up here preaching with passion, pouring their heart out, and you just sitting there quiet when they're talking about the beauty of the forgiveness and grace of God. How amazing is that? Can I get an amen? And if you just sitting there like, it's like, are y'all hearing me?
Right.
Are y'all hearing me? There was one black professor at Moody named Dr. Neely, and he goes, I believe it is a sin to make something as wonderful as the gospel boring. How can you do that? How can you preach in a way that puts people to sleep? Do you hear what you're talking about? We are forgiven. God loves us. It's like, yeah.
I remember Neely. He was an amazing preacher, by the way.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things where this is all culture. And I'm not even saying that white culture is wrong in those things, but it is just one way of going about it.
It's a difference, major difference.
Yes. And to say that we are right, no. You have a right to exist the way you want, but so do we, without making us feel like our expressions are too much.
Yeah.
So to give another example that has nothing to do with religion, it was really funny one time because I was visiting Calgary and I had shows in two different communities. And one was like a very traditional Korean church. And the other one was like a very hippie, progressive, young white church. And both of them valued to their core hospitality as one of the most important aspects of being a Christian. But hospitality in Korean culture looks like rolling out the red carpet for your guests. So when I get there, they made sure they put me up in a home with the wealthiest family in their church. They're both doctors. I wake up in the morning, they're waiting on me. They make me any breakfast I want. They take me to dinner at a nice steakhouse because I'm a guest and they want me to feel welcome. And I'm using my gifts to serve their community. And so why wouldn't we roll out the absolute best of everything we have for you? Because that's what you do when you're honoring someone, right? In Korean culture. So I did their community first, and then the pastor of that church was dropping me off because I was staying a few more days, and I was going to do a show in this hippie white community. And I was staying in a house where like 10 of their young people lived. And it was like, yeah, we are doing communal living, and every Thursday we have dinner for the homeless folks in our neighborhood. And when it comes to food, it's like they all pitched in, and it was like, hey, anything you want. They didn't get up to make me breakfast, but they're like, feel free to go in the fridge, Make some eggs, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, whatever you want. Our home is your home. It was, we're showing you hospitality by not making you feel special, but by making you feel like one of us.
Yeah.
You are just like us. That's how we make you feel welcome. Like you're one of the family. You're not some special guest. And so it's the same principle. We want to honor this person. We want to be hospitable. But these two different cultures do it in such drastically different ways that honestly it became offensive to the Korean pastor. He was dropping me off at this hippie house. And we opened the door and he sees by the door there was like a pile of like 20 pairs of shoes. And he freaks out. He's like, you don't have to stay here. He's like, I know you're done doing shows like with our community, but like you can still stay with us if you want to. And then we can just drop you off when you have to do the show over here. Like, you don't have to stay in this house. There's too many people here. Like, do you even have your own room? And the next morning, he literally texts me, he goes, did they make you breakfast? I was like,
wow, yeah.
You know? But it's one of those things where it's very easy to judge the other culture. Like, you don't even care about this person.
Right.
And it's like, no, hold up here. Like, they do it different.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But there is a lot within Christianity, within white Christianity, like, no, you don't do it different. You do it wrong.
Right. So I want to talk about that. What were some of the theological points or emphasis that were different in the black church you attended as opposed to the things that a white church would take for granted? Like, I'm assuming they emphasize different things in their preaching and in the life as a church.
100%. White culture in general is individualistic. We value, as a nation, when I say we, I mean white Americans, value pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. The American dream is like, no matter where you come from, if you, as an individual, work hard enough, then you can succeed, right? And so the emphasis is on the individual being disciplined, being a good person, and then you will be rewarded. And it's the same thing when it crosses over into theology. White theology emphasizes the individual. You have sinned. You have offended God, and you have to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. And Jesus lives in your heart, and you are going to heaven. And our emphasis is preaching and evangelizing so that each individual person may be saved. That's the emphasis. And when it comes to black culture in America, the emphasis is communal, right? We are oppressed and we need collective liberation. And yes, individuals have different circumstances. Some black people may be more or less oppressed but ultimately, no matter how wealthy you are, if people hate you because you're black, you're going to be treated different. You could just as easily get murdered by the police, right? And so when it comes to spirituality as well, it's not that we don't believe in individual personal Lord and Savior, but we see the gospel as a liberating force. Jesus came to free those on the margins, right? To set the captives free, the slaves free, the orphan, the widow, the stranger, the people on the fringe of society. That is what the gospel is about. It's not just about you stop having sex before marriage, but people understanding the heart of God is to see liberation of people who are oppressed. And yes, sure, as well as repentance from individual sin, but it's collective repentance of evil societies that are oppressing vulnerable populations.
Right.
Right. And so that is the emphasis. And so with that being said, in the context of American history, what white people talk about as the civil rights movement, they don't talk about the civil rights movement as a spiritual revival, but that's how black people looked at it at the time. Martin Luther King was a reverend, an ordained minister, and his I Have a Dream speech, he is literally quoting the prophet Amos when he says, let justice roll down like a mighty river. And in the context, he's quoting a prophet who is speaking to the nation of Israel who have strayed from God's command of caring for the oppressed, right? And it says, you have become like fat cows grazing with your greed while you turn away from the needy at the gate. These are earlier in the book of Amos. The early chapters of Amos are calling out a nation that is oppressing the poor. And so when it gets to that passage Dr. King is referring to, it says, take away from me the noise of your song. I don't care about your ceremonies. I don't care about your religious services, but let justice roll like a mighty river. And so that is, I think, the primary difference between black and white theology. It's not just about you stop being an alcoholic and having sex or sinning as an individual. It's about a culture repenting, calling a nation, a people to stop oppressing the poor. And I think black people gravitate toward the gospel because when they, in their circumstance of being slaves, heard the stories from the Bible, they related to it. Oh, what? God heard the cries of the slaves in Egypt and sent Moses to liberate? God hears the oppressed? God came to set the captives free. We are captives. We are slaves. So they didn't hear you're sinful, you were born into sin, and there's no hope for you aside from the gospel. They heard God loves us. They heard, oh, you're poor and oppressed, and that angers God that you are being oppressed and poor. And God sent multiple deliverers to make sure that you were not oppressed anymore. And anyone who follows God, there's a guy named James Cone, a wonderful black theologian. He's passed away now, but he has a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And that's how he explains, he's making that connection between Jesus being crucified and black people being lynched. His whole thing is the gospel is about liberation. And so the emphasis ought to be wherever you find oppression, that's where you find Jesus. And so he was saying, it's not this self-righteous, like, we are saved in order to suffer. No, the gospel, God hates the suffering in the world and is trying to eradicate it and abolish it. So wherever, in any context, he says Jesus is black in America, but not because we actually think or that it matters if he descended from Africans. But, there's a quote, I believe it was Bonhoeffer in, World War II, where he says, no one can sing Gregorian chant, which is a type of worship in the German church. No one can sing Gregorian chant unless you cry out for the Jews. And the idea and the connection to the Black American theology is, in the context of World War II, Jewish people were getting put in ovens. So how can you say that you love God when this great injustice is happening? You're going to church on Sunday and worshiping as you're watching this awful, terrible oppression happen right around. You cannot worship God. You cannot sing Gregorian chant unless you cry out for the Jews. In that context, that makes sense. In the American context, American history, no one can worship God unless you call out for the slaves. They are being raped and oppressed and beat. And if the gospel is about saving people and liberating their whole self, not just their soul, when they die, they go to heaven, but their whole, because Jesus came to heal bodies. He did miracles. He fed people's physical bodies. He healed their physical ailments as well as addressing their spiritual needs. And white Christianity emphasizes only the spirit. And the kind of do-good stuff, it's like, oh, don't get caught up in the social justice gospel.
Yeah.
What really matters is making sure they go to heaven. And I say, no, there is no separation between the physical and the spiritual. All of us, we are going to have a physical bodily resurrection. God came to save the human, not the soul, the whole human. So yeah, I think that's the main difference.
How did your creative journey begin, in the sense that when did it become something that you were seriously considering doing full time?
Yeah, not until after college, because in college it was just a fun outlet. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people experiment in college. You're away from home for the first time, you try new things. That was it. It was fun. But before I became an artist and started like expressing my creativity, I was never good at anything. Like, I just wasn't. My parents were strict. I was a good student in the sense of I did all my homework. I didn't skip class or nothing, but I didn't get straight A's. I was not a smart student, I was just respectful and I went to class. But so when it came to like career, I just didn't think I was capable of anything impressive. I was like, I'll probably be like, manual labor, construction worker, janitor. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. But I just thought that was all that I was able to do. I could work with my hands on some basic stuff. I can mop floors. And so I went to college. I picked communications because it was broad. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But when I graduated, I started trying to go the more traditional route, and I couldn't get hired. Everything was like requires 5 years experience for entry level positions. I'm like, what am I supposed to do, right? So I couldn't get hired in my field. I applied to grad school. I didn't get in because I wasn't a great student. I tried to do a bunch of other things. And then finally, I just reached the point I was like, I like making music. It's a long shot, but nothing else I'm doing is working anyway. So it's not like, well, let me just like pursue my dreams instead of doing something responsible. I'm like, I tried to do the responsible things first and it wasn't working. I was broke. I had to move back in with my parents. I couldn't get a job. I had a degree and I couldn't get a job. So I was like, well, people say I keep telling me I'm really good at rapping. And primarily it was rapping at the time. I had just, poetry came a few years later. So I was like, yeah, let me try to pursue a life as a musician, as a rapper. So really it was like all the failures that made me go in that direction. But it wasn't like some strong sense of like, I'm called to be an artist or anything like that. It was like, I just liked it and nothing else was working. Yeah.
How long after college did that happen?
Pretty immediately. I mean, like I graduated and I was living in Chicago for the summer after I graduated. And
What year was that?
2010.
Okay.
And so that's when I was like hustling, trying to find a job, trying to, get into grad school, all these things. And that's when it didn't work. So yeah, I ran out of money in Chicago and I had to move back in with my parents. And I don't have a great relationship with my parents. So that's when I was like, I got to get out of here. So I got to do something. And that's when I decided I'm going to pursue a career as a musician. And that led me to go to Oregon because there was a creative community I was connected to. But anyways, so it was like basically a few months after college, I was just struggling. And I was like, all right, I'm going this other way where. And I'm very, very glad I did because if any of those other things would have worked out, I don't know if I ever would have pursued a career as an artist. I might have kept writing, but I'm glad that I've been able to focus on it as the main thing I do.
How has that worked out? Because it feels like if you're not going to skyrocket to a certain level of fame or income, it's impossible to make it. Like it feels like there's no middle class artist. It feels like you either pay for everything yourself and you work another job, or you are set. Obviously, there's a period of struggle in between that, but I'd say you're not super rich, but you've continued to make art this whole time. How long has that been? Is that 14 years or 13 years?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I started Moody 18 years ago, actually. So my freshman year, I started rapping. But as far as like doing it full time, I think it's been 12 years. Yeah.
12 years. So how have you been able to keep going without charting on the top 10 on Spotify?
For sure. I mean, I think everyone has to define success for themselves. And I have prioritized my art. And I've also prioritized doing it as a vocation. Not that there's anything wrong with getting a part-time job or even a full-time job if you need to. Other people have different responsibilities. But I don't have any debt. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. So I don't need a lot of money for my lifestyle. I also live very simply, right? I've only bought used cars. I've never had a car payment. I try to keep my living expenses as low as possible because when I don't need as much money, then I can survive off of making less when, say, I don't have a lot of gigs, right? Or it's a slow season for my art. So I make those sacrifices intentionally to be able to maintain what I'm doing and also, invest more of my money into my next projects. But for me, like a lot of people feel like if you're not making all your money off of your art, or if you're not super successful in this kind of very typical way, then you should just hang it up. And I just strongly disagree. I've never been famous. I've never been rich. I've never been super successful. I have felt rich and famous because of it's all, relative to where you came from. We was poor, and so when I'm making enough money off of my music and poetry to have an apartment and I'm getting flown all around the world, on someone else's dollar. People are flying me to Hong Kong and New Zealand and Paris to perform. I feel like a rock star, but I was still like making $30,000 a year. It's like, yeah. But to me, I'm like, that's dope.
Yeah.
So anyway, but a lot of people require more than I require to feel very content, and so that has been helpful. But also, like, when I think about success, to me, to be an artist means to be a person who makes art. So as long as I continue to make art, I am an artist. And the only failure to me, it's not, oh, I don't get paid a lot or I'm not getting enough booking, so I failed. It's no. For me to fail as an artist means to stop making art. I'm no longer an artist if I'm not making art, like that's how I think about it. Like, and I'm never going to stop, because before it was my job and before I got paid, I did it because I loved it. I did it because it was healthy for me. And so when I think about success, I don't just want to make art, but I want to make art that helps people. And I know that as long as I continue to make art from honesty, then I will make art that helps people. Because sometimes I'm intentional about, tackling particular justice issues, but most of the time I'm not. Just like in the beginning, I wasn't like, I'm going to make art about racial justice. I was like, I'm just going to write about my life honestly. And that vulnerability connected to people. It helped people who also experienced it feel not as alone. It helped people who didn't experience it understand it. And so, yeah, for me, I want to keep making art, and I'm going to keep making art that tells the whole story of my life. I don't just want to talk about the heavy, hard stuff. I don't just want to talk about the lighthearted, fun stuff. I want to make art reflective of my entire human experience. And as a person of faith, I don't really feel the need to like intentionally insert my faith. I'm like, if I'm writing about my whole life and my faith is a big part of my life, then it's going to be there naturally. I think that's where a lot of artists who are Christians fail. They feel like, well, I'm a Christian, so I have to mention Jesus every single, and I'm like, I have songs and poems that never mention God or the Bible or whatever, and it's done just as much important spiritual work as other pieces that are overtly Christian, because I was honest about a conversation about suicide, or I was honest about a moment of joy that I had. Like, I know this sounds ridiculous, but this isn't even a poem, but just for an example of what I'm saying, when I started traveling, I like food. I like snacks. I like weird stuff. To me, the weirder the better. If it's something I've never tried before, I'm always going to order it on the menu. Like, what is that? That sounds gross. I'll take one.
Yeah.
And so one thing that happened was, as I got a lot of opportunities to travel in my 20s, I realized that even simple things like potato chips were drastically different in different countries and even different parts of America and Canada. But especially when I was traveling overseas, it was just like lamb flavored potato chips and things like that. So I got in the habit of like buying and trying these weird flavored chips on social media. I just posted to Instagram like a live review of me eating these, lasagna flavored Lay's or whatever the thing was. And one time, I make a lot of art about important things that I pour a lot of time into crafting these really important, messages, whatever. But I also just eat chips on Instagram. And I posted this video, and this woman responded, and she's around my age. And she goes, "Thank you so much for posting this." She's like, "I'm in an abusive marriage. And part of the reason I stay is because I'm so afraid of being single at this age. I feel like I will be so lonely and my life would be so depressing and sad, and like I wouldn't have any joy. So even though my husband is not a good husband and is harming me, I still feel like at least there's someone there." She goes, "But watching you exist as a very publicly single person," I make fun of myself for being single a lot, as a publicly single person around my same age, still enjoying life, getting so much joy out of funny flavored potato chips. She says, "It literally gives me hope that like, if I do ever have the courage to leave my abusive situation, that I could still have a beautiful life and be happy and have joy." So I wasn't like, this is the gospel as explained in potato chips. I was just publicly having joy, right? And so that's what I mean. Like, I can have joy because I know deep down, like, I love God, I love life, and all of these things are connected. But in that moment, if I would have been up there with my Bible cracked open, just preaching, she wouldn't have had that epiphany that she had. So to me, to just exist as a vulnerable human being, to be publicly in love and sad and struggling and celebrating, all of it could do something good. Another moment, which again isn't even a song or a poem, I went through a breakup, and my girlfriend at the time was very concerned because, people gossip, people fill in the blank. We ended things on good terms. We just weren't the right fit for each other. And she was like, oh my gosh, people are going to be whispering about us. And I was like, who cares? Because I don't care. I'm like, for me, rumors, no matter who you are, I mean, they crucified Jesus, right? You could be perfect and they find something negative to say about you. So it didn't really bother me, but it was bothering her. And so I was like, okay, well, why don't we just control the narrative? She's like, what do you mean? I was like, let's take a picture together and let's write a post about the fact that we broke up and that we still love each other and we still are supporting each other, but we just realized we weren't a right fit. Like, this is what happened, to just squash the rumors before they even get out there. And she was like, that's so weird, but let's do it. And we did. And when I tell you, we got dozens of messages from people saying, thank you so much. This was the most awesome thing I've ever seen. Wow, you took so much shame out of what I'm going through to just, hey, you can be a good person. You don't have to demonize your ex. It's okay. You guys look so great. We thought you were a good couple. And to be like, wow, it was just like so many people saying, man, I didn't know. I also didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could be that vulnerable. It seemed awkward, but at the same time liberating, and it was like, yeah, people get divorced, people break up. It happens. You're a human being. We don't have to shame ourselves. We don't have to hide our pain. We don't have to hide our joy. We could just exist. And again, it was like people on a deep spiritual level were like, man, your breakup post really healed something in me.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
I'm not trying to make it sound elitist, but I do feel like creatives and artists are different. They think differently than people who aren't that way. And one of the interviews that really was the first one that kind of highlighted that to me was the one with Andre 3000 and Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
We talked about it briefly. Why did that interview resonate so much with you? Because you told me you listened to that one multiple times.
Yeah, no, that interview was great. I mean, particularly it resonated with me because somewhat of what we were talking about before of like having your own, as an artist, your own definition of success. Because Andre 3000 was describing the fact that he didn't have his own definition of success. He had the one that we all thought, well, as a musician, to be successful means to have millions of fans, make millions of dollars, win Grammys, all that stuff, be famous. And he was saying, that's what I wanted because I thought that's what success was for me. And he goes, as a young musician, I had this void. I had this emptiness that I assumed existed because I hadn't reached the type of success I wanted. I thought once I get there, once I win the awards, once I make the millions, once I am a world renowned superstar musician, then I will like myself. Then I will feel important, like I matter. Then I will feel loved. Then I will have peace and I won't be as anxious or depressed. And he goes, one of the saddest realizations was after I achieved everything I wanted, the void was still there. And I realized, oh, dang, the thing that I thought was going to cure this didn't. And now I'm hopeless, he said. He says, because as long as I was like up and coming, there was hope that once I got there, this would go away. So that's really important to me to remember, like, whatever I think, whatever unsettledness or unfulfilledness that I might feel about anything in my soul, if I think it's going to be cured by being rich and famous, I am wrong. That in and of itself is not going to cure it. So what does it look like to have a healthy relationship to my art and to myself? And ultimately, I think that's what success is as an artist. Because Another person might want different things than I want, but either way, you can want something different, but do you have a healthy relationship to those desires? Do you have a healthy relationship to yourself and to the art that you make? What is your motivation for making it? Do you feel like it's only good if other people like it? Or are you okay with saying, I experimented and I made something that was risky and it didn't have mass appeal, but I'm still glad that I made it because I wanted to try something new, or that's what was in my soul? Is a piece of art a failure if the critics don't like it? For some people, yes. For some people, their aim is to make art that gets recognized and wins awards and people like. That's not the case for me. I want to make art that is honest, that is reflective of my experience. And I'm not even necessarily saying this is the right way to go about it. I'm just saying this is how I go about it. Because there are some artists who do look at it primarily as their vocation, in the sense of like an engineer makes money being an engineer. I'm an artist and I want it to pay my bills. And like, that's the thing that's most important, which I respect. It's just different, because if I thought that way, then I would approach it different. And I would be looking at, well, what do people want to hear? Now, I still would try to be myself to a certain degree, but I approach art like an experiment. Like I'm a scientist just seeing what happens if I mix these things together, right? And so for me, because of that, it's not about finding the formula that is the most popular and then repeating it. And that's what a lot of artists do. It's like, I want to be commercially successful. And so I'm experimenting only until I find whatever version of me as an artist is most marketable. And then I stick with that. Okay, cool. I might have started as a singer, but people liked my hip hop more. I'm a rapper. I might have started as a rapper. People like my poetry more. I'm gonna lean there because that's where the money is or the success is. And I'm like, that's cool, but that's not me, because I'm not just about finding what's most popular. Every different expression of my art, I'm learning something new about myself. There are certain parts of my mind and my emotions that I will never tap into no matter how many rap songs I write. There are certain things that will only come out as a spoken word poem. There are certain things that will only come out as a folk song, as an R&B song. The different genres I experiment with, they all have their own properties. R&B, for example, is inherently sensual. Like, that's the whole thing. Even when the songs aren't about sex, the vocalization is sexy. The melodies, the instrumentation. And so...
the bass track.
Yes, the bass. And so I'm tapping into a different part of my human experience. I am a sexual being. God made me that way. How do I engage and indulge and reflect on my sexuality in a way that is honest and in line with my faith and my experiences? That is possible, and that's something I want to do. But like, it was R&B that allowed me, and the properties of that art form and my willingness to step outside of what I'm known for, to try something new. So it's like, and again, I'm not even saying this is the right way, but for me, I am far more interested in the experimentation of art as I am in finding the one expression that is most popular and trying to blow it up as big as I can. Because if that was the case, people liked my hip hop, but they loved my poetry. And if that was the case, I would just stick to poetry. Poetry has taken me all around the world, has made me thousands and thousands of dollars, and I don't care. I'm working on an R&B album, and I still write poems, but I'm not like, stick with this because it's opened up the most doors for you. I don't care. I'm an artist. I have to experiment. It'd be like a chef saying, this is your best meal. Just cook that for the rest of your life because people like it. And the thing is, you could open a restaurant. I mean, if it's really good, yeah, you could serve the same thing the rest of your life. You can have your 5 best dishes at a restaurant. There's plenty of restaurants that exist for years that never change the menu. In-N-Out, they're not adding new things.
I'm glad.
They're not, exactly. They're not like McDonald's where they're always trying to, new item. No, they're like, this is what we got. Right? That's possible. But if you were a chef, you don't want In-N-Out. You want a restaurant that has a seasonal menu that allows you to keep experimenting.
Right.
I'm not trying to build something that's just, boom, tried and true. I'm trying to, let's experiment. What's in season?
Yeah.
What can we do that's different? What happens if I try this? That's how I approach art.
I think that's different across the landscape of artists and creatives,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like you said, that's not necessarily wrong.
Yeah, I
Everyone's
love In and Out.
different.
I love In and Out.
I mean,
Right? It's not wrong,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm glad there are artists like that where you know what you're getting.
Yeah,
You know?
I love it too.
But I also love artists that you have no clue when they drop an album if it's gonna sound even remotely like any of their previous projects.
Yes.
I love that too.
Those
Yeah.
are the ones that I think have the most, if they're being sincere and if they kind of seem to stick the landing, whatever that means, across different evolutions, and
Yeah.
they seem to like grow with that. Those ones have such dedicated followings, like
Yeah.
in a different way.
Yeah.
And I always have told people, like, if for some reason music took off and, you know, and I get a lot of money, instantly I'd like go to film. I'd start making a film. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
If that took off, I don't know what I do. I do something else. Like that's what I do. It's like I use the leverage I get from one thing to start that other thing that I've been thinking about.
Absolutely.
Right. And I feel like you do that a little bit too.
Oh, 100%. Yo, my poems is funding my rap career, right? Like,
Right.
You know, it's like I started out as a rapper, but honestly, if hip hop took off and I was dropping albums that were going #1 in platinum, like I wouldn't be like, oh, I guess I'm a rapper till the rest of my life. No, I'd be like, what else?
You're like, now I can do that thing I was thinking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm like, I personally am pretty set in music and poetry. I don't necessarily want to experiment beyond those mediums, but within those mediums, there's still so much more to be done.
Who knows? I mean,
know?
I could see you writing nonfiction at some point, whether it be like autobiographical or like, you know what I mean?
No,
Like,
absolutely. It's not something that I'm like, I will never do, but I've just never had the desire. But, desires can change, can come, can grow. But because a lot of people ask me, like, yeah, would you ever write a novel? Would you ever write a book that isn't a book of poetry? I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things. I have no desire.
Right.
I have no desire to write a book that isn't a book of poems. Like, to me, anything I can say in a theological book or a philosophical book or even autobiography, I would just rather say it in the form of poems.
yeah.
I'd rather write a book of poetry that functions as my autobiography.
Yeah, you just enjoy communicating that way better.
Yes, I don't have a desire to. But again, that could change. I think the only thing for me that I haven't done that I am curious about that is completely unrelated to like music or poetry would be acting. But I'm not curious enough to like get some headshots and go to auditions. But it's more like, if the opportunity ever came to be in someone's short film or whatever, I'd give it a try. Because people ask me about that a lot when they see me perform my poetry because it's very theatrical. And I'm like, no. They're like, do you have a background in theater? And I was like, nah. But yeah, I'm kind of curious about that. But for the most part, I'm like, music is so broad. There's so many genres and vocal techniques and things that, I'd never sung before. Like, I was just a rapper and a spoken word poet. And then I did a blues album. I took vocal lessons. And then I was like, okay, I can sing blues. But I'm like, well, maybe if I can sing blues, I can sing other things, So I'm just like, oh, man. And there's so many instruments that all the time I'm discovering genres of music and instruments that I didn't know existed, or new technologies are creating different capabilities that, it's just like, oh, what does this sound like? Like,
Yeah.
we have more tools. We have more toys. We have more colors to paint with as musicians, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, for me, it feels inexhaustible. I don't ever feel like I will get to a point where I feel like I need something drastically different, but I could be wrong. But yeah, I have so many different types of music I want to experiment with.
Well, I feel like I resonate with you when you talk about the experimentation part of it. I think that is so fun. And I think sometimes the best things come from people who have no background in what they're doing.
Yes.
Like, everyone goes back to early film history. Like Citizen Kane is regarded as like inventive, like, push film past a certain barrier. 1941, he was a radio guy. But the reason that it kind of transformed film is the way he used audio. Everyone would kind of patiently wait for the other actor to finish their line, and then they'd say their line. Yeah. But in radio, they were talking over each other. Yeah. And there's a certain type of editing that he did to make it sound more natural.
Yeah.
That changed the way film dialogue was done.
Yeah.
And he knew nothing about film. Nothing. Yeah. And he got the chance to direct this picture. He spent all day before he was shooting a scene talking to the other guys in the crew, like how do we do this? How do we do it? Just learning on the job. And for me, that's the most fun type of learning.
Yeah.
I'm learning because I'm literally having to make this right now.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned how to mix. That's how I learned how to record.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like, I want to write a song about this. I don't know how to get that sound. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? How do I get that sound? That brings me to like another question. How do you network? Like, is it just like meeting people doing live shows, or like, are you reaching out to people online? Like, how do you grow your network of people that you vibe with and, understand each other in a way that's like productive?
Yeah. That's a good question, especially living somewhere like Southern California and LA, where we have a high concentration of creatives in a lot of different industries, and there's a lot of overlap within those industries, film and music, especially, right? But I think, first of all, there is a fundamental like difference of intention in certain types of networking. A lot of people think about networking in a way that's very parasitical, right? Where you are trying to latch yourself onto people who are bigger than you, who are more successful than you, who can invite you up to the next level, right?
Do
And
something for you.
yes, and you are superficially kind to them and trying to impress them. I need to make a good impression so that I can get in that room. And once I'm in that room, I need to make a good impression on people in that room so I can get to the next room, And so it's very much just like I'm not necessarily trying to find people who I'm the most compatible with creatively or even just personally, like a good friend that we can just bounce ideas off each other, even if we do different things, like we're just in community. It's like, no, I'm looking for opportunities to better myself, and I will cozy up to whoever I need to, and I will do almost anything to get to that next level. That's how a lot of people approach networking, and it sucks because it's hard to know like when someone is actually interested in you or when someone's just trying to use you. And then there's a way, I don't know the exact word, maybe symbiotic, right? There's a way of building relationships that are mutually beneficial. And even apart from like a benefit, but just like, yo, like I am not better than anybody in here. No matter how successful I am, I'm not worse than anybody in here, no matter how unsuccessful I might be or unknown I might be. I'm an artist. I'm a creative. I have passion, and I like being in community with people who share those passions. Issa Rae talks about this and like her road to success. She's like, a lot of people, again, are always looking to network with people who are higher than them. And she goes, I looked around. And she goes, I knew when I was unsuccessful, I knew dozens of amazingly talented, unsuccessful, creative people. And so instead of me trying to be like, see y'all later, hey, why don't we all come together and be in community and bring our talents together and make something amazing on our tiny little budget and see what happens? And then together they did something dope that got attention of folks who were higher up, and then but it was not like we were kissing up to them to be invited up there. It's they noticed us doing our own thing. And so when I think about networking, that's how I like to approach it. Like I don't often go out to events with the intention to network, but I'm always aware, no matter where I'm at, whether I'm at a performance, a party with a bunch of creatives, or simply, at a coffee shop having a cup of tea, like anybody in that room might be someone who could be a really dope person, friend, encourager, collaborator. You never know. On an airplane, you'll be sitting next to somebody, and it's not just be kind to people because they might have something to offer you. Be kind to people.
Right.
It's be a welcoming person. Be open, not to just people who you think could do something for you, but because that's how you live your life and that's who you are. Because when I tell you, over the course of my career, I've met a lot of famous people. I've met a lot of successful people, a lot of wealthy people, and a lot of them have affirmed my talent and said, wow, you really got something there. And a lot of them have made promises to me. Oh man, I'm going to introduce you to this person. I'm going to get you this opportunity. Let me get your phone number. Let me do this. No follow up. or they call once, twice, we have a conversation. I'll get back to you, and they never get back to me. And then some of the best opportunities that I've ever had in my career have come from the most random places and people that I never would have thought would have had an opportunity for me. But it didn't matter because I didn't think they had opportunity. I wasn't trying to do anything besides be myself around them. And it was the being of myself. It was the connecting with them on a human level because we both love poetry. Like my first album, for example, was a spoken word album, my first full length album. It was called The Man Without a Name. And I met this guy, and he was, at the time, I was in my very early 20s. I was like 22. And I met this guy who is an older white guy who was the president of a nonprofit. He's not anymore, but he was the president of World Relief. I didn't think anything, but he saw me perform some poetry. And he was like, oh man, I love poetry. I write poetry. I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I have a blog where I share some of my poems. I was like, oh, I'd love to read it. Can I see your blog? And he gives me his blog. And then we started talking about music and jazz. And he sent me this DVD pack of Ken Burns, the documentary on jazz. So we're literally just talking about jazz and poetry. And I didn't think I would have that much in common with a white guy who's this much older than me and is the president of a nonprofit organization. It's not like he was the CEO of a record label, right? He seemingly had nothing to do with what I was doing. But we were two humans who both loved music and poetry. And from that connection, that relationship, their nonprofit was launching an artist program. They were thinking about, because a lot of nonprofits will partner with artists. And so, long story short, that friendship ended up into a really dope partnership that led to them completely paying for my first album, because I write a lot about justice issues. And so they paid for my album, but then at a conference, they bought 2,500 copies and handed it out. 2,500 copies of my first album, they just gave away to the people attending this conference. And that is what kickstarted my career.
Wow.
Because all of a sudden, 2,500 people from all across America went home with my CD. And then after that, I started getting invitations, right? But it was like, because I was just cool with this dude who's like, man, poetry's dope. I'm like, yeah, it is, isn't it? You know, it's just like, I wasn't like, let me network. You know, it was like, I was just existing as a human being. I never in a million years would have thought befriending someone who leads a disaster relief organization would help my career as a rapper or a poet.
Right, right.
But it did, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just like, you never know. You just got to be open.
It's just genuine connection.
Genuine connection.
Saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that doesn't mean you can never be intentional, but to really think about not just how powerful is this person, but do we actually resonate? Do we vibe? Do we get along? Do we have similar values? Because even people who can offer you something, but who have drastically different values, that might not be a good, like financially, sure, you might get paid or you might get more famous, but you might have to be involved with people that really don't make you feel comfortable or really try to push you in a direction that you don't want to go. And I'm not just talking about compromises in the sense of like doing bad things, shady things, but even just creatively. You know, I've had a lot of opportunities presented to me that I passed on because they wanted me to be a different type of artist. They wasn't asking me to do nothing shady, but they were asking me to conform to a box that I didn't want to be in. It was like, hey, you're very talented, but you do all these things. Like, if you would just focus on one, we could help you. And I'm like, well, that's great, but I'm not going to focus on one.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop writing poetry so you could just market me as a rapper. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
No, like, I will write you a rap album, but I'm also going to work on this book of poetry, and I'm also going to work on this blues album. You know, I'm going to do it all. Right? So it's just like, I don't know. But ultimately, it's just down to being a genuine person.
Going back to something you were saying earlier about kind of like the dating life and stuff like that, have you found that what you do for a living is like a hindrance to a lot of people, or is that what attracts them to you initially?
I will say this. I'm very oblivious when it comes to recognizing when someone is interested in me.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time. Like, if you're not direct with me and you look me in the eye and say, hey, I have a crush on you, I'm not going to assume you are. That being said, sometimes I don't know. I haven't had too many people be like, I'm attracted to you, but this artist thing is, I can infer from conversations I have with other folks my age and women my age looking for partnership. And like, it seems that my lifestyle and the fact that I travel a lot and I don't make consistent income, I could see that being a deterrence. But in my experience, people think it's cool. At least my experience with the type of women I'm drawn to, maybe because it's not like I have to date an artist, but I'm drawn to other creatives. So they don't really they understand it. They're like, yeah, I mean, it kind of comes with the territory of being an artist.
Right.
So, but maybe there are people that would be interested in me if I wasn't quite as, if it maybe wasn't my career, right? Where if I was an artist, but I also had a more stable job that didn't require as much travel and I had more steady income. So I don't know. When it comes to dating, man, I just feel like the one thing I learned is there is no formula. You have your general guiding principles about the type of person that you are and the type of person you're looking for. But the specific details and strategies, it's like what worked for one person is not going to work for you, right? Like, it's just not. Like, whether you're getting advice from older people who are dating in a completely different cultural context or people who are your age, but they're just a completely different person from you, and you look at their relationship and it's great, but who they are and what they need and what makes them feel, safe and at peace are totally different from the things that make you feel safe and at peace, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I don't know. It's one of those things where I always stay open to love, but I'm not that intentional. It's more like I'm living my life, and as I'm going about my business, making my art, doing shows, meeting people, if I meet somebody, then we'll roll with it. But I'm not like creating opportunities too often because I'm like, I don't even know how to go about this.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I don't know many people who love dating. I think people want to be with somebody, but the process of finding that person is confusing and sometimes painful and sometimes feels like a waste of time.
It's exhausting and expensive. And
expensive too. That's the
yeah.
other thing, especially if you're trying to live a frugal lifestyle as an artist, right?
Yeah.
That's rough. Well, is there anything that you would want to say to somebody who's considering going into full-time creativity? I know we had this talk a couple of years ago, and I told you, I think I called you up, I don't know, within the last year. I was telling you, like, I've told you this multiple times, but you're one of the main inspirations that has caused me to have the courage to actually step out and consider doing art and creativity full-time. Because you're one of the few people I know who's actually in my generation who has done it and done it for a while. Like, what would you say to somebody like that? What advice do you give them?
Yeah. Similar to dating, what works for someone else is not necessarily going to work for you. You have to take the underlying principles because, I can't be like, find the president of a nonprofit, and convince them to pay for your first album, It's like, I get, so you got to take the underlying principles. I think with people who want to pursue art full-time as their vocation, that is more of a mindset than anything else. Because I have been a full-time artist, and most of the time, I mean that literally as well. Like, I don't have income coming from any other source than my art. But sometimes, within the decade plus of being a full-time artist, I was struggling and I had to pick up a part-time job here and there, right? But there might be times where you actually have to work a full-time job. But you're not less of an artist because of that. You're still a full-time artist. Again, it's a mindset. If you're in a tough financial situation and you got debt or you got a kid and you need a 40-hour salary, that's fine. But in your mind and heart, you understand I'm doing this so that I can continue to pursue my art. And this is temporary. I might have to work this job for 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Right.
But I'm still going to be intentional with all the free time that I have outside of that, the resources, how I spend my money. I'm not just going to be investing and getting more and more comfortable in life. I'm going to be, all right, this is what I have to do, practically speaking. But I'm still a full-time artist. I got 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And what I tell people all the time is, this is the part I do not understand. I will never understand this. Because whether you're working full-time or part-time, How many times can you be late to work in a row before you're fired? Not that many, right? Maybe two. Third time, you're probably going to be out of there, right? So people get it together for other people's dreams. People find the discipline to wake up early, to show up on time, to, have that uniform tucked in, whatever the thing is, to smile and to serve the customers even when you're having a bad day. And so you are investing so much effort into helping someone else's dream or someone else's business thrive. And then when it comes to your own art, you don't show up for yourself. And I don't get it. And I'm not just talking about people who are like physically tired who don't have time, because there's a lot of artists who do have time. They only work part time. And then when they go to work on their art, they're constantly dilly dallying. And I'm like, if you want this to be your job, treat it like a job. If you need to put disciplines and say, okay, you have hours. If you're working a part-time job, I work from 12:30 to 6. Okay, cool. So if that's how it works, then have some discipline around your creative process. These, 3 hours on Tuesday or these 6 hours on Friday, I'm going to dedicate to either making my art or making moves related to creating opportunities for my art. I'm going to be building my website or, searching for collaborators in my area or, going to events to network with other artists, whatever the thing is. It's like, why would you show up so well for a job you don't even like and then neglect your own passion and your own dream? I'm going to invest way more into my dream, both financially, time, emotionally, than anybody else's funky job that I don't even want to work.
Yeah.
So I don't get it. But also, again, define success for yourself. Don't feel like you're a failure just because there might be a season where you can't live off of your art. Looking at things historically, so many expressions of creativity, whether you're talking about music or painters or whatever, so many of the most celebrated artists in history died in poverty, barely sold any paintings, barely got recognized. Early jazz musicians, this isn't even music. Early rappers, this isn't music, they're just talking. It's like anything new, especially people who are particularly good and innovative and ahead of their time, as they say, which doesn't exist. But the idea is like, all that means is nobody liked their art. And then later people recognize it as something beautiful, right? So it's like to say I'm a failure unless I am in my time and age recognized by millions of people as good at what I do is just ridiculous, because so many of the best artists in history never experienced that. And they are literally the people we held up as like the standard now.
Right.
After the fact.
Yeah.
And so, you may not be a great of the future either. But the point is, that is an inaccurate way of judging the quality of your art. But also, art is subjective. And I would say always stay connected to your why, to the reason you started making it in the first place. Because even if you have success, but you're disconnected to that primary motivation, then the success isn't going to feel good. It's like, if I have success, but I'm no longer making art that is reflective of my whole life experience, and I'm no longer making art that is helping people, but maybe even possibly harming people because I compromised for opportunities or I compromised my message, to have mass appeal, then I won't even be able to enjoy the success. And I've met artists. And again, when I say compromise, I don't just mean like morals. I mean, even your creative integrity. I've met artists who are successful, who are making art that does help people, but they don't even like their own music.
Yeah.
Because they changed it to have mass appeal.
Right.
To me, that's the worst. I would rather be far less successful and like the music I make than have wild success and millions of dollars and put on my own album and be like, this is whack. I didn't even want to make this. I just followed the formula that the label gave me.
Yeah.
And it worked. Because if the music industry wants to make you a star, they will. You will pop up overnight on billboards all around Hollywood and LA. I've seen it multiple times. Artists that I have followed for years, and overnight, obviously they've been working a long time, but once that decision was made by the industry, and so it's like, I don't want that type of success if it comes at the expense of my creative integrity,
Yeah.
you know, or my moral integrity,
Right.
or whatever, you know? So it's just like, you have no clue what this journey is going to bring you. You have no clue where you will end up. But if you want to be an artist, make art. Then you're an artist. No other anything determines whether or not you're legit. What matters is an artist is someone who makes art. So if you want to be an artist and you don't make art, you're not really an artist. If you want to be a musician and you don't put out any music into the world, you're not a musician.
Yeah.
You know, you're just thinking about being a musician. But it doesn't matter how much it sells.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good other people think it is. I'm a poet because I write poems. I'm a rapper because I rap.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Are you a chef if you never cook? No.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
So make stuff is your advice.
Yes.
Make
stuff.
stuff.
And
And
share it. And share it. That's the other thing. Because a lot of people make it in the closet and they're so afraid because they're, you know, trying to be perfect. And it's like, sharing will help you improve.
Yeah.
Getting over that fear, having the experience of putting out a project that not a lot of people paid attention to and still saying, okay, and time for the next one, and just continuing to create anyway. Is it hard? Sure. Most artists, and when I say most, I don't mean like 70%, 80%. I mean like 90, 98, 99% of people who make music will never experience wild success, millions of streams. The overwhelming majority of us will never get there. Are you saying that all of those artists are wasting their time? That's the most foolish thing I've ever heard. When I think about the experiences I've had with music that have moved me on a deep level, on a spiritual level, that have healed something in me, that have inspired me, very few of them have been at some basketball stadium, you know, where I'm there with 20,000 other people watching a concert. A couple, but the overwhelming majority of my experiences with music, with art, that have really moved me with other artists have been in some tiny little bar, some open mic, some friend who I met along the way who put out an album that just spoke to my soul, and they're even less famous than me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you're just like, yo, this is all worth it.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. Just make art and share it, and you never know. Like, there's strategy and you should use it, but there's also a bunch of randomness. There's also a bunch of luck, or whatever you want to call it, you know? Because I'm like, yeah, like I said, with that dude who was running the nonprofit, his name is Stephen Bowman, great dude. I wasn't strategizing and positioning myself. I was just making art, and I was taking every opportunity to share my art. I took it. If there was a stage and they allowed me on it, I was on it.
Yeah. Right.
You know, if I get, work with what you got. If you don't have a big budget, work with the budget you have, put that music out, start recording in your bedroom, you know, and then as things grow, you can do bigger things. But like, the sharing is so important, because you as an individual, you can only be in one place at one time. So you could be working on songs for years, but you're telling me that the only way to experience your art is to be in the same room and sit in the audience? That's very limiting. But if you have albums, videos, poems online, YouTube, books, whatever, paintings online, you know, and you don't have to be in the gallery to see it. You know, it's like, so many of my opportunities came from just existing online, from putting out projects, from not just creating them, but releasing them. And I use the metaphor of like an on-ramp, like a freeway, right? If this is the freeway and you want people on it, this is your art, your career, but you only have one on-ramp every 50 miles, there's going to be so few people on that freeway.
Yeah.
Right?
Very
but
true.
if you have an on-ramp every half a mile, people might be looking up like, something cool is happening up there. How do I get on? No. Oh, come on up. And so I'm like, it's not about just having like one song that goes viral, right? That might happen, it might not. But you have 50 songs with a couple thousand views each. But those songs are all on YouTube. They're all on Spotify. They're all getting added to random people's playlists. They're all being shared to random people's Instagram and TikTok stories. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, literally, some of the coolest opportunities have come from some of the most random places of people just stumbling across my work. I'll just give you one example. My favorite visual that I've ever been a part of, like, I have a music video for my song Pulp Free. It's excellent.
Yeah, it is.
The filmmaker who made that, he was in high school and he decided that he wanted to get into spoken word poetry. So he literally goes to Spotify and just types in spoken word poetry. And one of my poetry albums popped up. He thought the cover looked cool. So he listened to it. And he loved it. And he became a fan of my work in high school. Then he decided, so he started following me on social media. And he ended up going to college in Long Beach, which is where I live. And he was studying film. And he said, hey, man, that one artist that I really like, he lives in Long Beach. I'm studying film. You know, before I graduate, I want to do a film with him. And so he waited all 4 years. And then he graduated and he was still living in Long Beach. He said he waited because he wanted to be good. And he's like, I'm getting better. I'm in school. And he just reaches out to me and he goes, hey, I've been a fan of your work for a while. I do film. Like, if you have any projects, I would love to like offer my services to you for free. And I was like, word? Okay, well, what you got? So he sent me his website. I looked at his films. They were dope. And then I was like, all right, well, the quality's there, but who is this person? So I hopped on the phone with him and I got to know him. And I was like, he seems legit. So we shot the film, we shot the music video. And on set at the music video, one time I was like, we shot it over 3 days. And I was like, hey, dude, how did you hear about me? And then he told me that story, right? But again, it's like the album he came across was an album I put out years ago that did not get a bunch of streams, did not bring me a bunch of money, but, you know, 7-8 years after it's released, it gets me a free music video. You know, we like bought lunch for the staff and a few things. The whole music video cost me $500, but they didn't charge me for the shooting. It was just like supplies that they needed.
The oranges.
And yes, supply and feeding the crew. Right.
Yeah.
So I was like, it was a 3-day shoot. It cost me $500, and I got, I mean, minimum for a music video of that quality would have cost me $5,000 minimum.
Oh, yeah.
Minimum.
At least.
Right. But I'm just like, again, I was open. I wasn't like, who's this young kid? You know, but I put art out there, and it was an on-ramp to the freeway of my career, right? And the same thing, so many opportunities. I mean, I'll give another example. The first time I got booked, I've been to New Zealand 4 times.
Wow.
4. I have no friends in New Zealand before I went. I do now, but I had no connection to New Zealand. I didn't even know where New Zealand was on the map. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I couldn't have pointed it out. But I get booked there for this huge conference. It's like 5,000 youth. And I'm there, and someone asked me, hey, how did they hear about you in New Zealand? And I said, honestly, I don't know. And the guy sitting next to me was the guy who sent me the email. He goes, oh, I emailed him. And I was like, oh, yeah. So how did you hear about me? And he goes, years ago, like 4 or 5 years before this event, I was in America at a conference. And it was a tiny conference in Seattle. Like literally, when I say tiny, like less than 50 people.
Wow.
And he goes, and you performed. And I thought you were really good. And you did this really good poem about hair. And I just always remembered it. He goes, but I didn't remember your name. He goes, but fast forward, we're having a meeting planning this event. And they were like, we want to do something different this year. We want to have some spoken word poetry. And he goes, oh, I saw a really good poet in America a few years ago. And they said, oh, great. What's his name? He goes, I don't know. And he's like, they're like, okay, well, thanks for nothing. He goes, no, I can find him. So I go to YouTube and I type in spoken word poem about hair. Boom, you popped up. There it goes. The thing is, the video he found, again, didn't have millions of views, but it was me. And I hashtag, hair, poetry, spoken word. He found it from one YouTube search. And from that video, he found my name. From my name, he found my website. And he sent me an email. And he invited me to New Zealand, paid me a few $1,000s. I made a bunch of connections. I've been back 4 times.
Wow.
Right? But what would happen and it wasn't a music video either. It was just like a live performance of me performing this poem.
I think
right?
I've seen
at this
it.
church, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, what would happen if that wasn't on YouTube? Nothing, right? Like, so it's not enough to just write it and perform it live. To share it, put it, let it exist, and let it work. I'm sleeping, and people are stumbling across my stuff on YouTube, and people are stumbling across my albums on Spotify. I'm not actively doing anything. My art is working and creating opportunities for me because I released it instead of waiting until I gotta wait till it's perfect. I gotta wait till I get signed to a major label and it's like, no, if those things are ever gonna happen, it's probably because I have been dropping albums like a madman left and right. You know, I do not hoard my art. If there's any art that I don't have released yet, it's just because I don't have the funds to finish it. But my poems, they out there. You know what I'm saying? Like my music, I'm not gonna just record it and sit on it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a perfectionist and overthink it. I'm like, hey, whatever. I'm going to make another one. No matter how long I work on a project, it's never going to be perfect. Perfect doesn't exist.
Right.
So it's just like create, release, and keep it pushing. Because every single anything, any piece of art that exists online and exists in this world, it's like, yeah, instead of you just being one person, they're all working for you.
That's beautiful, man. How can people find out more about your stuff? If they want to support you, if they want to support your next project, if they want to see you, is it your website? Where do you point people to?
Absolutely. So I do have a website. I don't know anybody who goes to websites anymore,
Yeah.
but
That's true, actually.
Yeah. But so I do have, I'm active on social media, mainly Instagram, but I also recently launched a TikTok. I always post, you can also on my website, everything is just my name. MicahBournes.com is my website. And then my Instagram is at Micah Bournes, TikTok at Micah Bournes. I'm constantly posting on social media when I'm going on tour, when I'm releasing new projects. As far as ways to support me right now, I am actively running a fundraiser campaign for my next project, which is actually 2 albums reflecting on romance. The first one is about romantic disappointments, heartbreak, relationships that didn't work out. The second one is about healing from that and meeting someone new and being excited and hopeful about love again, but also being afraid still a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
And so, so that campaign is running right now. It's a GoFundMe, and it's gofundme.com/Micah Bournes. So, and then if you want to support me on a more regular basis, I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Micah Bournes, where you can give any amount you want on a monthly basis, $5, $10 a month. If you sign up for Patreon, you get cool stuff like early access to unreleased songs and poems. Some of the songs from the albums I'm working on are already on my Patreon. I'm constantly posting poetry and playlists of things that have been inspiring me, like, you know, whether it's a documentary I watched or a really dope album from a lesser known artist. So I share a lot of cool stuff on Patreon. But yeah, right now my biggest push is the GoFundMe. I'm trying to raise money to get these albums out. But yeah, follow me on social media, especially Instagram and TikTok.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me,
Thanks for
brother.
doing this, man.
Yeah.